many of you have a blockchain project? Does anybody in here have a blockchain project? Okay, so that's about, I guess, 30% of the audience. How many people invested in an ICO? How many people lost money? How many people made money? Okay, how many people would invest again in a more regulated fashion to be safe? Okay, so that's about everybody. So I guess this is why these security token offerings, we believe, are going to be something that helps revolutionize the industry. And as Don Cornish from the Bahamas said earlier, the Bahamas and the Caribbean in general, but especially the Bahamas, has been in the financial services world for over 100 years. There was a gentleman earlier that said something about tax evasion. And we said, what? In the Bahamas, there's no such thing as tax evasion. You always pay your taxes to the jurisdiction that you're from, or if you have to pay taxes in the Bahamas. But what we do have in the Bahamas that is very interesting is called tax neutrality, meaning there are zero taxes on blockchain companies when they come to the Bahamas. So a lot of companies, when they think about where do I want to go, how do I want to structure myself for a security token offering, the Bahamas is always a very attractive offering because of that reason. We have tax neutrality, meaning you pay zero taxes on your business activity in the Bahamas. But a part of that process for STOs is that you're able to now focus on what you're doing as a project. You're able to create what you want to create, and you don't have to worry about the legality of it once you pass the criteria. And we're always talking about being a gold standard, which means that we're not allowing every single project to be regulated in the Bahamas. You have to have a certain criteria which is set by the regulator. And the regulator in the Bahamas, they've set out a clear set of guidelines. And some of those guidelines, I'm just going to flip through this presentation a little bit. Some of those guidelines have to do with you being able to indicate to your sponsor and the regulator that your business is scalable. And I know that that question might be a question that would have multiple different answers, but if your business isn't scalable, if it isn't a sound business, if the underlying business that is going to be generating profit for who your investors is not secure, then that means there's no reason for you to be regulated in the Bahamas because your business is probably going to fail. And we don't want that to happen, and we don't want to give risk to investors. So I think one of the good things you should look at when you look at STO offerings coming up in the future is, where is that offering regulated? And are they regulated? There are many websites out there now who are saying, oh, we're listing projects, and you can't find much information about them. You can't find any of their company registrations. You can't find if they're current. So that's one thing that we wanted to change in the Bahamas, because we want people to be safe, but at the same time we want creators to be able to be free to do what they want to do, but with those regulations. So after we learned a little bit about what was going on in the industry, we waited to jump in rather than starting very early like Malta and Singapore and other places, because we wanted to see what would happen. And so one of the things that come up to us all the time is, how long does it take you to get a certificate or to get approval for an STO? Does anybody in the audience know how long on average in different jurisdictions does it take you to get regulated to have a security token offering? Anybody? Any guesses? Someone at the top? 3 months. Someone says 3 months. 1 year. Okay. Oh, there you go. What was that? 1 year. Okay, no. So, and that happens in a lot of different jurisdictions. So what we wanted to do in the Bahamas is say, it should take people 45 days. That's all. By law. So that means once you come into the Bahamas, and you meet with your sponsor, you select your sponsor, you sit down with that person, they give you a checklist. Here's what you need, A to Z. And you provide them with all that information, and it's you get a certificate of compliance from the sponsor that basically says, okay, you're ready to go to the regulator. From the time you get that certificate to the time you go to the regulator, there's 45 days that the regulator has to make a decision on your case. If the regulator does not come back to you, it is seen under the new law as approval, and you have permission to proceed. So that means that now, as a project, you don't have to spend time wondering how long is it going to take. I haven't heard back from the lawyer, this hasn't happened, that hasn't happened, the next. And a part of the process before the 45 days is setting up a business in the Bahamas, and the next question is about banking. So a lot of our projects around the world have been talking about it's hard to get a bank account, it's hard to get a bank account. But in the Bahamas, we have already 3 banks. One that a lot of people will be familiar with. That bank is called Deltec. That bank is working with both Bitfinex, Tether, and a lot of other major players. And then the newest bank is the Bank of the Bahamas, which is a government bank. And so they are all offering banking services to blockchain companies that are registered in the Bahamas. So now that allows any creator to take that headache out of the equation now and say, okay, I at least know that I can get banking services so that I can go on and do my business. So I think that is another one of the key things that we worry about, is about banking services in all of our different jurisdictions. So I'm just gonna maybe talk a little bit about what the Bahamas, what our first STO looks like, which is PO8, the firm that I'm running. And basically what we wanted to do, it's quite, I think, nuanced, is that we wanted to see blockchain technology solve a problem for the Bahamas. That was one of the mandates of the government. And so in the Bahamas, we have a lot of shipwrecks from 500 years ago, 400 years ago, when the Spanish government was in charge of places like Colombia and Bolivia and Peru. So this is the 1400s and the 1500s. And they lost a lot of these ships in the Bahamas. So in 1960s and 70s and 80s, the Bahamas gave out a lot of licenses to people to come and search for these ships. They found ships, but a lot of the time, the integrity process was lost, there was no transparency, and the government of the Bahamas was unable to recover the funds that they should have recovered from these explorers, or, so on. And so they closed the industry 20 years ago, and this company, PO8, is the first company to get a license to go back into the waters. But it's an integration with robotics, AI, and blockchain. Everything is being done with robotics and run on an integrated artificial intelligence system, but everything is also over a distributed ledger because none of the artifacts can be sold. So one of the only ways that we could figure out, well, how are we going to monetize these artifacts beyond putting them in the museum, and that was through non-fungible tokens. So all of those artifacts are going to be owned by a non-fungible token, and then those non-fungible tokens, through different sets of investment vehicles, will be open for anyone to buy, fractionalize, invest in, use as collateral to do any number of other things with. And so that has been what our first STO offering has been about in the Bahamas, and we've seen quite good success. In the month or so that it's been just taking commitments, we're already up to 15%, and the total raise is for 50 million, and so that's been encouraging. Now what we've learned, and so this is another takeaway, is that when people are registered security in the Bahamas, you now can accept money from any accredited investor around the world that is not on any type of blacklist or whatever have you. And so we have already American accredited investors, European accredited investors. Because people think, well, if I have my project in the Bahamas, will I be able to accept money from those other jurisdictions? And the answer is, for accredited investors, yes. So another question I kind of want you to, I want to ask you is, from all of the projects that you've seen in the STO space so far, has there been any STO project that you've been wondering about that stands out to you? Maybe anybody has a comment about that or a question?
Hello, Matt.
Hi, how are you?
So first of all, thank you for this wonderful lecture and for the great value you're giving us. These are really useful information.
Thank you.
So I think now I can continue on this topic. My name is Emma and I'm coming from Swiss Rockets, and we are actually doing a really interesting STO launch. So we are incubator and we are investing in startups that are working on a breakthrough technologies in the field of cancer research.
Wow.
Yeah, so we are based in Switzerland, in Basel, and it's, as you know, probably in Switzerland regulations are quite hard. So everything now that you talked about Bahamas is making me think to go to Bahamas and just
please come to the Bahamas.
And we are done. So my question to you would be, what do you think, what is the biggest motivation for all of the institutions in Bahamas to make it that regulated? And do you think, is there any chance for some of those terms to be applicable in other countries so the process can be much faster than 1 year or a couple of months?
Yes, so actually I think one of the biggest motivations for the Bahamas to get into the security token offering space or the blockchain space in general is that in the Bahamas, the second biggest contributor to the economy is financial services. And we've seen the financial service industry dwindle a bit. And because it's been shrinking or getting smaller, we've been looking at how do we take our experience, be it 100 years in whether it's captive insurance, whether it's banking, whether it's trust, foundations, you name it, how do we apply everything that we know to the blockchain industry now? So that all of the projects that you've talked about, like Swiss Rockets and even like Smart Velour, all of these projects could now look at the Bahamas jurisdiction and say, well, maybe I will de-risk myself, like people like Binance and other people have done, and they've also come to the Bahamas and set up entities. Because you have to think about de-risking. How do I make sure that if something happens in one jurisdiction, I'm safe in another one and my business can continue to operate? And so this is one of the reasons why everybody has kind of said, let's do this together, let's jump in. So let's say that you're going to run a business. You can be registered in the Bahamas, but your business activity can be outside of the Bahamas, yes. So you don't have to have your assets. Let's say you're going to tokenize real estate. Your real estate does not have to be in the Bahamas to have your mother entity or your financial entity registered in the Bahamas, no. Well, again, now what structure you use, you can use an SPV to tokenize it. Again, if let's say that you have a piece of real estate in London or in a penthouse in New York, a $20 million penthouse in New York, and you're saying, I have my legal structure in the Bahamas, you still need to consult with a local lawyer in the US. They're most likely going to tell you to set up a corporation in Delaware, and from there, that corporation do that tokenization. But at the end of the day, when you look at how am I going to raise this money, you can still have that money first come into an entity in the Bahamas, and then the Bahamas entity invests in the entity in Delaware, and on, so on and so forth. So again, that's all up to you and your lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, I can't give you any legal advice. But the structure itself, you can have in the Bahamas, and you can use that for any number of investors. We have our own case study on real estate, and we set up a structure similar to that where investors were able to invest in the entity in the Bahamas. Then we set up an entity in Delaware, and from there we were able to do tokenization of a particular piece of real estate already in the US. So that works, but again, getting a great lawyer works as well. Question over here. Good.
Hold on.
How about which one is it? Oh, so okay, I'm just going to answer in 1 second. You're talking about the artifacts in the Bahamas? Okay, so for the artifacts in the Bahamas is a bit different. since PO8, by the law of the Bahamas, is something called finders keepers. We keep 75% of the revenue from that artifact. But by law, the government is our partner. They get 25%. So in order to create a secure store of value, what we've done is we've taken the artifacts out of the beneficial owner's hands, which is PO8. We've given it to a custodian, which is a museum. So it sits there. In the smart contracts, there's a no redeemability clause on the underlying asset. Only under one condition, which is like force majority, the world would have to be ending. And in that case, you don't need it. You got to run for your life. So that creates a secure store of value. And now people, once that asset is tokenized, they're able to invest in 3 different products. One is called a non-fungible investment vehicle, where they can buy a artifact at pre-conservation valuation, meaning if this artifact was found today, 1 week, we can basically tell you about 60% what the cost, what the value is, and you can buy it. When it is conserved already 1 year from now, you bought that artifact for $10,000 today, but 1 year from now, when the second evaluation is given to you, that non-fungible token will receive all of the upside. So it could be another 30%, another 25%, and that means that in that year you would have made 30 to 25%. So we're looking at it as alternative investments and secure, stable investments for people who, you know, whether it be a hedge fund, whether it be other retail investors. And so from all of the closed tests that we've done already, it's working quite well. And so we're going to open up large product offerings. We're hoping maybe end of year or beginning of 2020. But she has a question.
So, that's amazing. I love the example of these artifacts that totally makes sense. It's really great example of tokenization. But my question is, for all the other stuff, like you made an example about real estate in London, right? I mean, you know, before tokenization in traditional finance, Bahama, BVI, and so on, they were used for tax purposes, right? But the fact is, I still need to register to offer it to Americans. I still need to register it with Security and Exchange Commission. To offer it to people in UK, I still need to register it in UK. So what is like the final advantage?
Okay, great question. So I'll tell you what we did. So an actual example. So for example, if you have a security token offering, it's registered in the Bahamas, and you want to offer it to American investors. Actually, by nature, because it is already a registered security, the accredited investor, institutional investor, without having a registration in the US, can take that risk on themselves, and the Securities Exchange Commission will not come after them. The problem is that when it is not a registered security, the Security Commission has a problem. But what we did was we filed a Reg D. So a Reg D, a lot of people, they listen to, you know, any number of service providers, and they say Reg D costs you $100,000, costs you $50,000. That's garbage. If you have a great lawyer, Reg D is not expensive at all. And then you also have, maybe you will do a Reg S. And those people who are non-Americans can start trading right away. There's a great lawyer who's a part of this conference that is now talking about a Reg A, all of these things. So one of the good things and one of the upsides is that as a registered security, any accredited investor, any institutional investor can invest in you immediately. So yes, if you have a from a retail side, you're going to need to maybe make some type of exemption, but filing exemptions is not expensive, is not a tedious process in any jurisdiction. And you would want to do that anyway, just to safeguard yourself, and that's just a part of building a more robust business. But when you want to talk about, again, whether it is tax neutrality, whether it is good banking services, or whether it is being in a jurisdiction where a government wants to see you succeed, and wants to hear from you as a project, the Bahamas is that type of place where you can have a meeting with the regulator and say, hey, here's what I think, here's where I think this is going, and you can help the regulator to grow, and you can help your project to grow as well. Are there any other questions?
Is there still time for questions? Is there time for one more?
Please, I think. I mean, I don't know what's stopping us.
I'll ask if it's one more, Matt.
Oh,
so my concern with some of these is actually technological. It sounds like STOs have got a pretty good grip on regulation that the ICOs did not. And I disagree greatly with the presentation earlier to the question, do you own any Binance token? Well, I don't think you do. CZ owns your Binance token, and in fact, Vitalik Buterin owns all of CZ's Binance tokens, because I don't see those systems as decentralized at all. So
I agree.
when it comes to the STOs, the technological risk is still there, because if you build your STO on an insecure blockchain, which I personally believe Ethereum is, or EOS, or people can disagree, what happens when the underlying technology you think is decentralized isn't? If there's another DAO, if your technology gets exposed, you think it's decentralized, it was centralized, now what? Isn't it closer to the old model? Like, where is the actual digital innovation in this?
So I like that question. I think it's a great question. And I think that as we move forward, right, as we move forward and we think about the technology that is going to govern this, whether it's whatever blockchain those smart contracts are going to be generated from, what is the most secure, most decentralized, of course it's Bitcoin, right? And so maybe we have to look at how we can build on, you know, that particular infrastructure that is the most decentralized, that is the most safe, so that we can still have security token offerings, right? Because if we just say, well, you know, Ethereum is not decentralized enough and Neo is not good, you know, the Chinese government might shut that down, then we won't do anything, right? We won't move forward. We won't have any progress. So I do think it's about finding the happy medium. I do think it's about looking at, you know, if the Bitcoin network, if Lightning, if all of these things are available and we can now use that technology to have security token offerings as well, and our assets that we build on it are going to be secured and decentralized, then I say why not? And the good thing about the Bahamas is that we are completely open to any type of smart contract standards that come out, and when the regulator looks at it, they don't really look at it from I guess this might be a good or bad thing, from a decentralized or centralized process. They most likely look at it more as, am I safeguarding the investor? Am I safeguarding the issuer? And is this a security or is it not a security? And are they being taxed in the right way in the jurisdiction where they're from? Is it, you know, compliant with KYC and AML regulations? So I think that those are some of the questions that the jurisdiction takes on. And I think from a technological standpoint, one good thing is that when you have jurisdictions like the Bahamas that are very strict on who gets regulated, then you don't have a lot of projects that are just out there scamming people and having these ICOs that fail and flop. You're now going to have projects where CEOs and owners and beneficial owners, they're all held accountable, where even in this law you can be locked up to 5 years if you're seen breaking the law or being duplicitous. And one more thing I want to add on this that I think is good. When you invest with an STO project that's regulated in the Bahamas, you have a 72-hour cooling off period. Meaning, if in 72 hours you learn any information that makes you want to change your decision and get your money back from that project, by law, that project has to give you the money back. So I think that's another way of safeguarding that helps us as an industry to grow and to become more mature. So if there's no more questions, I think it's time. How are we doing time? Okay? Running out of time. No more questions? Anything? No? Everybody? Thank you everybody. Thank you so much.